Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. I'm Ian Willoughby, Environmental Coordinator for Dyson Farming. Just a bit of brief background about myself. Agriculturally, for background, however, trained in forestry. I've now come back to sort of combine forestry and my agricultural experience to work within the sort of environmental sort of sector of Dyson farming to understand how our environmental features and how they link with sustainable food production. Now, a little bit of a background to the farms. Dyson Farming farms 14,000 hectares. A hectare is an international rugby pitch, just to put it in perspective. We farm in Lincolnshire, Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, and we have a very diverse crop rotation. And we'll come on to that at a later point. Our core part of the business is regenerative approach to farming. This has 5 principles. It minimises soil disturbance to maintain structure, covers the soil from above to prevent soil erosion, but also compaction as well from rainfall. Retains soil roots in the soil to preserve organic matter. Grows a diverse range of crops to maintain health and a good rotation within there. We include livestock within the rotation to add nutrition and also biodiversity at a landscape level as well. So there's 5 core parts of the business. Obviously, the big part is food production. Growing quality food crops and rearing livestock. We have an energy part of the business where we're powering 10,500 homes from 2 anaerobic digestion plants. And then we're also looking at technology, again, linking within those plants to provide alternative ways to power our farm machinery. Our environmental credentials is key, with over 1,500 hectares of environmental stewardship features across the farms at a landscape level. Research is key, so in this predominantly independent research analysis of crops for management breeding, so for crop production and the benefits within the environment. Also, we have an extensive property portfolio. This is providing high quality rural housing from redundant farm buildings and also leisure opportunities through our holiday cottages, etc. So Dyson Farming has been in operation for 10 years. It started in 2012 with the purchasing of land at Nocton and Carrington, and this carried on through to 2017. In 2017, we saw the state-of-the-art grain handling and storage in both Carrington and Nocton. In 2018, again, state-of-the-art potato storage at Nocton. With 2020 saw the purchase of green crop information, and this is the independent research division, now known as Dyson Farming Research. In 2021, we saw the glass house. It was the ground was broken, and the first strawberries were also produced in that same year. So that's a quick snapshot of Dyson Farming over the last 10 years or more. We have 5 core areas to the business. Innovate, technology-driven farming. From cameras to assessing green leaf index as the machinery drives through the field, to allow a very rate use of fertilizer application. Creating value and health within the environment, valuing our natural capital by recording and making accurate assessments. This goes through to our carbon audits. Connecting people with food, our farm visits, from industry to schools, and I'll just plug Open Farm Sunday on the 9th of June. So anybody willing to get out on farm, and you're very welcome to come up to Nocton, and you will take you around on a farm tours and things like that on Open Farm Sunday on the 9th of June. So plug for the industry, that one. Investing in research and engineering, we're always trialing new technologies and to get improved quality and production. We're a customer-facing food brand. a brand that can be instantly recognised, trusted, and also validated. So, like the journey of the last 10 years, we've also been moving through the technology over that period. So, the slide sort of shows some of the areas that we're using for sustainable agriculture. This is from variable seed rates, soil texture mapping, all linked together to provide better application of crop growth. You know, my areas particularly protecting nest sites. These are Schedule 1 licensed birds, marsh harriers, and the accuracy is down to 2 centimetres. And believe it or not, that picture in this slide there was in a crop of rye that was over 7 feet tall. You know, when you get to see me in person, my feet are quite large. You know, you wouldn't want me to walk in on a nest site. So the accuracy is quite key. We're able to also take this site and actually put it in the farm machinery to put exclusion zones to protect these nest sites from the actual farm machinery. We use ultrasound monitors to actually sort of record our pollinators, and this is to get 24/7 data on farm, real-time data of pollinators within the landscape. So as our features change within the landscapes, we can actually sort of see where there's potential hungry gaps for pollinators, so we can actually provide that over long term to actually provide food. So this is where technology is really helping at landscape level food production, but also helping the actual wildlife within that actual landscape as well. We use vision technology on the sprayers, so we can actually identify individual weeds, and so we can actually spot spray those individual weeds, which is actually really not only cost saving technology, but also with the reducing need of chemicals, that's actually a benefit within the environment. A huge array of different things have been going on over Dyson farming, and this is literally just a snapshot. Right. We've been running our carbon journey. An interesting sort of area to talk on. We have been establishing our environmental features. We've got over 250 hectares of wild bird covers. Some of you can see in the pictures there. This not only feeds birds, but also pollinators, and again is part of that analysis of providing food for those hungry gaps through the year. We have 11,713 standalone trees, and yes, I've seen them all. 390,000 metres of hedgerow, with extensive conservation being done each year. This is hedge laying. This is a way of actually laying the hedge over and actually preserving it for decades to come. We have 249,000 metres of watercourse. This is the Dunstan Beck, showing the actual quite innovative work for water quality. 550 hectares of woodland, much of it ancient woodland. This is woodland that's been on the site since pre-1600s. Using cover crops to protect the soil. This is, you can see the cover crop has been grown, and then the actual next crop has been drilled straight into it. All of this helps sequester 20,000 tonnes, or over 20,000 tonnes of CO2 a year. So that's sort of part of our carbon journey. We're also connecting with people. So, like I've already mentioned, there's high quality housing, there's leisure opportunities we've got. Key one is education. So educating people from primary school level all the way through to industry representatives, community events, publicising sustainable agriculture through shows, and also political engagement. So trying to actually get political engagement to actually steer the industry in the right sort of area to actually push forward with sustainable agriculture. We've got 6 different areas of funded research. We've got the nitrogen use efficiency, which is R-leaf. This takes nitrous oxide out of the air. This could totally replace nitrogen use, and it would be a huge win for sustainability and carbon sequestration as well. We've got transformative reduced input in potatoes. This is a method or methods of reducing cultivation by foliar feed, breeding to maintain quality and yield. We've got UK plant protein, which is taking Dyson peas and determining what is the most suitable products to make from that product. Photovoltaics, which is solar PV panels on reservoir. This works at reduced temperature, increased efficiency, but not only that, also the aquatic habitat underneath is a cooler temperature in the summer months, so actually has a benefit to the aquatic habitat underneath that. Low carbon fertilizer using biostimulants, and this is trialing the different biostimulants against one another so we can reduce our fertilizer input. Very novel breeding techniques, which is gene-edited old varieties like Clare wheat, which uses far less inputs, increases yield, protein and yield by up to 20%. So, consumer-facing food brand, it's a trusted, validated food brand, and education is a big key to that. When I was preparing this talk, I was thinking, how do I actually do the whole of our farm production and actually talk about sustainability? I thought we could maybe also have a breakfast meeting as well, but I've managed to actually just choose one crop. So it's the humble potato. We grow over 12 commercial crops over the farms, from forage crops through wheat, barley, oilseed rapes, peas, vegetables, miscanthus, strawberries and onions. So it's a huge crop portfolio, and again part of that regenerative method of a very diverse crop rotation. So the humble potato. We'll start off with soils. So soil health. We maintain living roots within the soil. Sorry. And this helps increase organic matter. It provides food for the soil fauna, and you'll see a lot of this actually over the presentation. You'll actually see how this is all interlinked. It's not just one area that can actually sort of benefit. Everything is interlinked, so it maintains huge amounts of organic matter. We're able to use plant diversity, so multi-species, to add diversity to bring benefits to each other. So, for instance, legumes, so the pea family, the clovers, all take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and actually sequent that into the roots. So we can actually grow crops either just prior to the potatoes or prior to the crop, and actually bring that into the actual the benefits to the next crop. So it reduces our inputs, but actually also has benefits for the soil diversity. Rotation length is also key to our cropping. This naturally controls plant diseases and also pests. So something like potatoes will be a crop rotation of in excess of 7 years. So a huge amount of time to rest the soil, and actually before we actually grow potatoes in it again. Sometimes that's in excess of 10 years or more. So that is the big part of our soil health program. Biodiversity, more is better. So the more diversity we've got within our soil, the more flora and fauna that we've got. Is benefit. How do we actually bring that? So we've got the organic matter that feeds our fauna and fungi. The fauna actually sort of leave tunnels for the actual water to translocate through the soil, so that has a benefit for the actual soil profile. We have things that we haven't really understood yet. So we've got soil mycorrhizal, so associations. This extends the actual root profile of the roots by linking into the roots, the fungi. Feeds the actual roots, which feeds the plants. This also enables plants to control pests and disease. It's a way of plants communicating through one another. So actually, if a plant is stressed or struggling, that they can actually communicate with one another. It's a very big thing that happens in the wild, and it's something that we can harness a lot more going forward. So understanding all of those fixations and associations is key. Drainage is a big part of it. We're going to talk about irrigation in a minute, where we're actually wetting soils. So it sounds a bit Irish, this does, but if the soil is too wet, the roots don't grow. We'll end up seeing plants stressed. We'll see plant decay within that. So that then leads on to issues with storage and waste going forward. So drainage is key. So the roots basically can't stand being in anaerobic conditions. The soil flora and fauna actually provide the pathways to actually allow water to travel through the surface. So again, that is all sort of linked within the actual soil health side of it. Soil type. We've got a huge diversity of soils within our business. This makes for management decisions. If there is too much clay, the crop for potatoes, it would allow for difficult harvesting conditions when water levels are high. And bear in mind that in the production of potatoes, we actually do a lot of irrigating, so our water table is naturally high. So this will lead to damage to the soil structure, which will have negative effects for future crops, but also the environment as well, because that could lead to runoff. So it leads for management decisions. We've got loamy soils, silty soils. That's ideal for potatoes. So that be ideal. Chalky soils provide a very white potato, so actually for a market that is key. The only snag with chalky soils is because of the stone, so actually there could be more waste with that. So knowing the soils and actually choosing it for the right markets is a key part to it. Peaty soils or high organic matter soils, they grow, they hold on to, they retain the moisture. They're a good potato growing. However, again, for soil conditions as well, in the later months, it can actually lead to difficult harvesting conditions. And sandy soils are very free draining and dry. So again, you could have quality issues. So you actually need to know the actual soil type that you're actually going to be growing on to actually make those management decisions to see whether it's the appropriate crop for those soil types. We'll move on to cultivation. So in the first part, I said there are 5 parts of regenerative farming is minimal cultivations. Deliberately chosen a crop that actually uses cultivations. So technically, it has a negative effect on that methodology. However, I was growing potatoes 20 years ago, and to actually plant a potato, we could do in excess of 8 cultivations. We've now got this down to 3 cultivations potentially. So that sort of has a huge effect on the sustainability and the conservation of that soil. To grow quality potatoes, it needs to be a stone-free, fluffy soil around the potato. We're not only just growing the potato, we're also going to have to store that potato going forward. So if we don't have those right conditions, it will affect the actual viability of that storage going forward. There is a cost of production, both financially and environmentally. The cost of production is obviously the more cultivations we have to do, and the harder that work and those cultivations, obviously the higher the cost to that, both in machinery wear and tear, but also diesel as well, which has a negative effect on our carbon sequestration. Also, from an environmental point, every time we move the soil, we're releasing carbon, so that has a negative. There's fuel usage. Obviously, the more cultivations we do, the more fuel we use. Would the answer be no-till? This maintains soil structure. However, as customers, we've become sort of led to quality. So we had to we grow these potatoes within this nice fluffy soil to actually get this nice good quality potato. We have done trials with no-till. Our quality isn't so good, so we can get split potatoes where the moisture around the potatoes, they stop growing and then they grow again and they actually split the skins. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly fine, but it means that they've got to be peeled and used in a different method. So they're more processed going forward for the actual parts of the production. You'll find that skins have often got scab on them. Again, part of the quality side of it. So that's a negative side to no-till. So there's got to be a compromise within this. We've already seen that our cultivations have been reduced dramatically over the last 20 years, but we can also use cover crops to actually sequester carbon. So we can work the land, grow the cover crop to actually sequester the carbon and help prevent that loss in the future. This also has the benefit of nutrients, recycling those nutrients from the past crops to actually bring that forward so that the next growing crop, the potato, can actually feed off those going forward. It feeds the soil fauna as well, and that has a benefit of actually keeping that life within that soil. So while the soil is live, it is growing and healthy. We can also use, and I've already mentioned, rotation prevents pests and diseases. But how do we can actually use cover crops to actually control pests? If we grow certain cover crops and we incorporate those into the actual soil, as they decay, they can give off a gas which actually naturally kills off certain pests. So we can use these biocrops to actually control pests within the actual soil as well. So that's all part of the actual circular side of what we're trying to achieve. No waste. So processing. So through the processing of potatoes, we get the byproduct. Now we've got two options with this. We can use them as a livestock feedstock, and as I've said, we've used livestock within the business, or we can use it in the anaerobic digesters as feedstock. And realistically, the two are very similar. They take the product, and in the animal sense, it's producing meat, and also in the anaerobic digester, it's producing a gas, and we're harvesting that gas to power a generator to produce electricity. The byproducts from the AD plant, all the animals, then go back onto the land. So this then feeds the actual soil fauna and flora and fauna. And it has the benefit of increasing water retention, but also improving drainage as well. And that water retention is key, especially for a crop like potatoes, where we're trying to maintain a nice damp soil for healthy, continuous growth. We don't want staged growth in a crop like potatoes, because we get that split growth stages. We get a varied size of potatoes, so we'll get some small ones, some big ones. We want a nice even growth range of the potatoes growing naturally. So again, this increases the nutrients, so it reduces our need for inorganic fertilizer. So it has a benefit for not only the environment, but also the carbon sink as well. So we've got water. We use a lot of water for crops like potatoes. I want everybody to look at their little finger now and look at their fingernail. We call it potato initiation, and when the potato is less than the size of your little fingernail, that is already being affected by the quality. So we use the irrigation to actually provide that nice moist soil to actually create a nice clean looking potato, like the image you've already seen. So the trouble with irrigation is that we've got we're taking water out of the environment. We're actually going to have an effect on the landscape itself. So availability and resilience is key. So we can see in the picture we've got a reservoir there. It's 45 million gallons of water storage. We basically harvest the water off our land holding in the winter months when there's excessive water. We store that in these reservoirs, and then we use that through the summer months. Not only is this a sustainable way of providing water, it reduces the stresses on the wider environment. And I mean, we all use water in our daily lives, so the less water we can abstract from the environment, it leaves more for public water use and also the environment, which is key. This is a huge resource, and we also have oyster catchers nesting and feeding their young on this during the summertime, which is a little bit unusual when considering we're probably about 20 miles inland at this point. So a coastal bird, and we've got them nesting in the middle of Lincolnshire. So around the outside, there is the aquatic benefits as well. So there is the benefit there for the wider environment, and you can see the banks of the actual reservoir are full of pollen and nectar as well. So again, these strategically placed reserves of water have a strategic effect within the landscape and link in that corridor of the landscape. So the quality of the potato is key, and that is why we use a lot of water. If we're not having the direct effect on the habitats by abstracting water, this leaves the greater water resource within the habitats. Also, from irrigating, we do get water usage going through the soil profile, which you'd expect, and that actually increases the amount of water in the adjacent drainage systems, benefiting the local habitats to those field parcels that are growing potatoes. So there is a knock-on effect for that. Now going to move on to environmental features. So landscape parcel connectivity. So we're looking at the benefits within the actual field parcel. So for instance, our field margins that go around the outside of the fields, that is where we get our beneficiaries living. We grow pollen and nectar mixes through the middle of the fields when we're growing potatoes. So our tram lines, where we travel through with machinery, they have pollen nectar strips put through the middle of the fields. This benefits not only beneficiaries in the sense of coroid beetles, which will go and prey on our pests of things like our slugs, but they'll also have a pollinator effect through the landscape. So that is key. So we're now sort of looking at sort of landscape benefits. So you can see in the picture in the top, you can see the rows through the middle of the fields. You can actually see how they're connected through the actual field margins and how that all fits into the landscape as a whole, from hedgerows to field trees. And part of this landscape is open, which is key to certain key species. So but having that as a whole is key to the connectivity within the landscape. We're linking natural habitats, so from the watercourses through to the hedgerows, woodland, all of these field parcels actually sort of link within those habitats. We have research going on at the moment where we're trying to look at individual species to provide benefits to the actual crop that we're growing. So the crop of potatoes, what key species or specific species can actually benefit those individual beneficiaries to actually predate pests within there. So for instance, we're looking at something at the moment where we're looking at aphids. a huge problem for potatoes. They're a young succulent plant as they're growing. Aphids go mad when those potatoes come out of the ground. And the trouble is, the sort of natural environment can't sustain the beneficiaries quick enough to actually take advantage of that huge array of pests coming through. So what we're looking at is individual species that can actually act as hosts to actually give it a much more cushioned, sustained benefit through the landscape of those beneficiaries to actually take advantage of those field parcels growing those individual crops. Move on to pollination and pest management. So we try and encourage diverse invertebrate communities. So from all the conservation parcels that we've got within the landscape, is the field parcels, we're trying to encourage a greater diversity of beneficiaries and more numbers as well. Part of the programme is to use integrated pest management. So rather than treating the pest, we're actually using working with nature to actually control those pests. And part of what we're trying to do is maintain pollinators within the landscape so that when we grow certain crops, and potatoes is one of them, to be fair, because there are flowering species that can actually use pollinators to actually use for plant breeding. And actually sort of take that within the landscape. So that is key to growing the crop successfully and that landscape sustainable integrated pest management approach. Yield increases through this is a benefit. We're maintaining better quality, better food security. We're reducing our costs. And it also makes a good marketing strategy as well. So that's key to it. We're looking at pollinator resource. I've already mentioned sort of at a landscape level. You know, bees and pollinators will move around about 3 miles, but if we can maintain a good amount of pollinator resource through that landscape throughout the year, from realistically February all the way through to November, they're able to maintain greater numbers of pollinators within the landscape. This is key to other species. We've got the climate species, so the triangle of life. It has benefits for bats, birds, which feed off these insects going forward. And the landscape enhancement is stronger pollinators throughout the landscape. So we're not just looking at individual crops, individual field parcels. We're actually looking at this at a landscape level. So this has sort of created a huge web interlinking for sustainability. We couldn't just choose one area to actually make a crop sustainable. And when you compare this through the whole of the crops that we actually grow and how they all interlink and the benefits throughout all of those crops at a landscape level, you can see how they're all interwoven and how those benefits all link into a sustainable farmed produce. Now, I seem to have rattled through that. I don't know whether that was nerves or what, but I seem to have rattled through that a lot quicker than I have done in preparation. So if there's any questions, I'll please happily take them, if that's okay.
That was brilliant, Ian. Thank you. While we're waiting to see if we get any questions through, I think it's really interesting just to see that holistic system that you end up needing to have. I mean, the web that's on screen right now, I think, paints a really clear picture of how many different factors there are involved just in the potato, and then when you start to consider the different layers of different crops as well. Nice to see how it all comes together. if there
I'll
aren't any
talk through.
questions, oh yeah, sorry.
I'll talk through. We've got 111 owl boxes at the moment. We're just in the process of actually starting to ring some of those birds, which is part of our monitoring of actually sort of that landscape level. So we've been doing that over the last, over the last 6 years. I'll just tell you a bit about the boom and bust. This sort of, 6 years ago we were at 80%. The following year we dropped down to 20%, 25% success rate. And we class a box as successful if it's got a breeding pair in there. So it's not that the in the landscape level that they actually disappear. It's just that they don't breed. And a barn owl, for example, won't breed until the female is up to weight. So she'll be up to about 350, 400 grams. So they're a really good indicator of what's happening in the landscape. So we actually the following 2 seasons we got up to 60%, and the following last year we were at 40%, and that was down to weather, unfortunately. So weather has a huge effect on that. But if you can imagine, a field vole weighs around about 20 grams, a harvest mouse weighs between 2 and 4 grams, both food source for barn owls and kestrels alike. But actually, so you can sort of see that when field voles are down because they've overeaten within the actual landscape. That is, how we were part of our monitoring program through the British Trust of Ornithology. So, and I have the pleasure of ringing these birds, these magnificent birds. That's part of our data collection.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can imagine that sort of that ecosystem and the impact that small triggers can have on it and on the whole ecosystem can be vast. We have had a few questions through, so I can read them out if that's most useful. We've got one which is, have you ever thought of drawing underground mineral water?
Oh, mineral water. Now that's a good one. So I'm going to take this one slightly off piece a little bit. We farm land on the coast in Lincolnshire, and groundwater is quite an issue there because of the saline concentrations, which is going forward as we or water abstraction is increased in those sort of areas. The cushion of fresh water sitting on top of that saline water, and they're basically a balloon of fresh water, because the saline water is heavier, it sinks. Actually puts greater stress on that freshwater resource. So actually, we're trying to actually reduce any harvesting of water in those sort of areas. Harvesting water in the areas where we're looking at, in actual fact, we're trying to look at do the opposite. We're actually looking at aquifer recharge. So we're trying to recharge the aquifers to allow better resource for the habitat as a whole. So no, we're not harvesting mineral water, but what we're doing is actually looking, trying to recharging those aquifers for the benefit of human drinking water, but also the habitat and landscape habitat going forward.
Brilliant. We've then got one which is about, you mentioned that it takes maybe 7, maybe 10 years for crop rotation for potatoes. How do you determine that the soil health and biodiversity is then ready to go again?
It's a good question. We're sampling the soil both from minerals every sort of 4 years, so that's a good indication of the state of the soil. We're also, and that's through GPS located spots. So we're going back to exactly the same spot and actually taking the soil sample, and we're building up that profile over time. And that's looking at nutrients. It's looking at organic matter. And we're able to actually sort of analyse that going forward. Before we grow a crop of potatoes, so at least 12 months or 24 months beforehand, we're taking assessments of actually pests and diseases within there that might affect potato production. So we're actually sort of using that to make educated results rather than just doing a bog standard rotation. So we could say sort of 7 years, but actually we're making in-field decisions by the results of what analysis we're getting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Oh, interesting. The next one is, with a big industry like Dyson farming, imagine there's an expectation to look for margins and political engagement, and that probably requires quantifiable data for the decisions. How do you measure and justify complex environmental impact of farming decisions, like the way that the water is stored?
It's very, very difficult, and you use a scenario. We've got 9 of the 11 species of bats within Nocton Woods, which is 100 hectares. And one of the most annoying things from my point of view is that we can't actually tell you how many numbers of bats we've got. We can tell we've got strong colonies. We've put bat boxes up, but the natural habitat that we're creating within that woodland, the natural deadwood, is where the bats are preferring to actually use as maternal roosts. So we can't actually go and actually sample those because we'd destroy the habitat. So quantifying data when in situations like that is exceedingly difficult, and actually we need to try and put a figure on that. So that is very, very difficult. Quantifying so things like we're doing our key performance indicators on water quality. So we're sampling water across our farms in Lincolnshire, where water starts on farm and comes off farm, and we're sort of making management decisions from that as well. We're also doing bird surveys. So we've been doing that for over 5 years now, and we're making management decisions from that. So everybody would say, well, planting trees and hedgerows would be the right thing to do for the environment, because that would not only sequence carbon, but it would also provide a food source and habitat for birds and things like that. However, from the key species that we've got within those land parcels, some of those species actually like a nice open landscape, and if we were to put things within there, that would actually have a negative, like hedgerows and trees, that would actually have a negative effect on those key species. And these are red listed bird species, very rare species. So actually, it's very, very difficult. What people would consider as the right decision, in our opinion, would be the wrong decision. So we're trying to do that all the time, and actually, for people to understand that is very, very difficult.
Yeah, no, that does sound really, really complex to try and find the pros and cons of any decision like that. Right. As you have an ethos of sustainability here, have you ever attracted bees for pollination of your plants by artificial means, or is it always by planting plants that produce nectar?
We in the wild we plant species that will sort of provide that natural pollination throughout the season. In the glasshouse, we actually use certain types of bumblebees to actually sort of pollinate the crop, and that is key, because the actual wrong type of bee within that sort of crop would actually affect the quality. So we'd actually get a lot more waste if we use the wrong type of bee. So in the wild, it's a little bit different. I mean, we're wanting huge amounts of different pollinators to actually pollinate our crops, from oilseed rape, peas, beans, lucerne, the potatoes. There's a huge array that actually sort of use pollinators within the actual landscape. So we're planting a huge array of different species, and the whole point of it is that we're planting them so that they flower at different periods to provide that longevity of pollinating food source through those months. And this last year, due to sort of milder winter, we were still getting pollinating plants where pollinators were still using in mid-December, believe it or not.
Wow. Do you know why that was, that we were having such a shift?
To be fair, it fluctuates throughout the year, throughout different years. And this year we've just had a very mild period, and as soon as the temperature rises, the pollinators will come out, and if there is a food source there for them, they will take it. So having that in the landscape is key, and that's what we're trying to promote within the landscape.
Oh, brilliant. That's really interesting. We don't have any more questions, so I'm happy to ask a question that I have, but if there are any more from the audience, then feel free to drop them in the chat. In the meantime, I'm quite interested in the funded research that you mentioned. You talked about things like the UK plant protein through peas. Is that funded research where there are researchers within Dyson that are looking into that, or is that then funding external research? I think I saw that Innovate UK was on that slide as well.
Yeah, so there's external as well. We're using so we've got the independent research side of the business, and that's sort of taking a big lead into that, but also using external people as well. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, a bit of both. Right.
Both, yeah.